seated. There were some people that lived out in the country, in the backwoods, as you say, and they lived across the river from one another. Sort of reminds me of the Hatfields and McCoys, right? So a couple of families that lived across the river, and they were always feuding with one another. John hated Clarence with a passion, and he never passed up a chance to throw rocks across the river at Clarence. This went on for years until one day the Corps of Engineers came to build a bridge across the river. John was elated. He told his wife that finally he was going to get the chance to cross the river and whip Clarence. He left the house and he returned in a matter of minutes. His wife asked what was wrong. Didn't he intend to go over the bridge and whip Clarence? He replied that he never had really seen Clarence up close and didn't realize his size until he started over the bridge and saw the sign, clearance, 8 foot 3 inches. If you could choose your neighbors, who would you prefer? How would you prefer them to act? And what would be their ideal character traits? Now, unfortunately, unless we're making a decision about where to live, we can no more choose our neighbors than we can choose our relatives, other than our spouse, of course. One day, Annie and I we were looking at houses listed on the internet, and we found this beautiful little house on a little cul-de-sac in a quiet little neighborhood, and we decided we'd go check it out, right? And everything about that house was wonderful, except for the fact that it was built only a few feet away from another house on the cul-de-sac. Now, I may be guilty of judging a book by its cover, but there was trash and old toys scattered all over the porch and the front yard and the side of the house. The house was in obvious disrepair, which was in contrast to all the other houses on the cul-de-sac. The vehicle in front of their house was some kind of very old SUV painted in camouflage. And the first thing I thought when I saw all of that was that the property value of the other houses on that cul-de-sac were taking a pretty big hit in terms of their property value because of that neighbor. Well, again, if you could choose the character traits of the ideal next-door neighbor, what would they be? And of course, it goes without saying that you and I are just as likely to be that neighbor, right? So let's turn that question on ourselves and ask about our own character traits. Before I answer that question, let me explain why this is an interesting topic to me. And there are two reasons. First, on an academic level, in grad school, I studied the discipline called Christian ethics. And one of the categories in Christian ethics is virtue ethics or character ethics. What does that mean? Well, according to character ethics, a person's character shapes their behavior and decision-making ability or process. So, a person with good character traits, whatever that might mean to you, will make good decisions and engage in good behavior. So, in other words, everything stems from our character. It begins with who we are. And so, the point is we should work on developing good character traits. And then good decisions and good behavior will flow out of that. So you begin with yourself. That's one reason I'm interested in this topic, because I studied it in school. The second reason, though, is outside of the academic setting. Before I went to school, I came face to face with my own character issues, and I went through a little bit of a moral crisis that sort of remained with me for a very long time. And here's what happened. I was in my early 20s. I was a young man. And one day I decided I wanted to go play golf, so I drove down to the nearest golf course to play, and nobody was in the clubhouse. And so I noticed there was a slot in the door and a sign that said, put your money in the slot. The manager was gone. So I didn't have the correct change. I didn't have a checkbook with me, so I decided I would start playing. I would go ahead and play the first 9, and then at the turn, I would go and see the manager. Hopefully he'd be back by then. I would pay at that time. So I played, and after 9 holes, I went to the clubhouse. The guy was still not there, so I decided I'd keep playing. So I finished the back 9, and I went back to the clubhouse again, and again he wasn't there. And so I told myself, well, I just got a free round of golf. Well, afterwards, I went to a friend's house, and I told him how lucky I was that I didn't have to pay my green fee. His wife overheard our conversation, and she said, "Jimmy, you lack character." Well, that comment stung. Ever since then, I've tried to understand and practice what it means to have good character. Although I continue to believe that deep down inside, I'm still kind of rotten to the core, right? But I tried. But what is good character? The Bible takes a stab at this, particularly in some of the New Testament letters. And one of those letters was written by or attributed to a man named James. Now, some people think this is the brother of Jesus, but it's highly unlikely because it's written much later. But the letter of James is full of advice, ethical advice. One could spend a lot of time gleaning through the letter of James for ethical and moral insight. If James were a musician, we would say that he had a lot of hit singles. On the lectionary calendar today, we find some verses in the first chapter of this letter that I would include in a list of what I would call James's greatest hits. And you probably recognize some of those when I read them to you. I'm going to read 3 of those to you again. And I'm sure you've heard these before. Verse 19. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Verse 22. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers. Verse 27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress. Do you recognize any of those? These are some of his greatest hits. These 3 verses represent what I call Character Ethics 101. If you want to be a good and virtuous person, this is a really good place to begin. These 3 verses give us a perfect trifecta of moral advice. If you go to the horse races, you know what a trifecta is. It is a bet for what the person believes will be the first 3 finishers in a race in the correct order. So if you guess them all right, this horse is 1, 2, and then 3, you're going to win a lot of money, right? Well, these 3 verses are a perfect trifecta of morality or ethics, particularly character ethics. The first 3 finishers in a race and in the correct order. So what are they? Let me kind of go back through and discuss them briefly. The first character trait he mentions, the foundational character trait that you and I should have, is openness. Openness. Here's how James puts it. Let everyone be quick to listen. Listening is an act of openness. When we listen, we are open to what others have to say. especially those who have some kind of moral authority over us, like our parents, teachers, employers, or whoever. So if we are quick to listen, James says, we will be slow to speak. And consequently, if you do those two things, then you will be slow to express your anger. We are less likely to jump on conclusions or to conclusions when we value listening over speaking. And I think this is where good character begins. It's where it has its root. Opening our ears, that is opening our minds and opening our hearts to what other people have to say. Listening first. That's number one. The second character trait he lists in this trifecta is integrity. Integrity. James words it perfectly when he says this: be doers of the word and not merely hearers. Going back to the first one, being able and willing to hear or listen to others is a good first step. That's where we begin. The second step is to act on what you have learned, to do and not just to hear. That's integrity. That's what it means. Integrity is the opposite of hypocrisy, which occurs when we don't act according to what we hear or what we have learned is good and right. When I heard that young lady all those years ago tell me that I lacked character for not paying for my round of golf, or at least for being gleeful that I didn't have to pay for it, she was really telling me that I had no integrity. And at that point, she became my moral instructor. I was obviously open to what she had to say because it affected me so strongly. It took me aback. The question is, did I learn to practice what she taught me? Did I just hear what she had to say, or did I become a doer of the word that I heard from a moral instructor? And did I become a doer of the word for the right reason? This is important. Sometimes we become a doer of the word because we are more concerned about our reputation than about anything else. We're concerned about our reputation, not about our character. I love what Abraham Lincoln said about this. He said, reputation is the shadow, character is the tree. Reputation is the shadow, character is the tree. So if we focus on our character, Lincoln is saying, then our reputation will take care of itself. Our character is much more than just what we try to display for others to see. Our character is who we are even when no one is watching. Good character is doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do, not because we want to have a good reputation. And that's integrity. This brings us to the third character trait in James's perfect trifecta, and that is compassion. Pure and undefiled religion, he says. Could anything be stated more strongly? Pure and undefiled religion is characterized by caring for orphans and widows. Notice it doesn't say anything about dogma, believing the right thing, or going through the right rituals. Pure and undefiled religion is caring for orphans and widows. Meaning, the people who in our society who are most vulnerable. That's what it means. I don't believe anyone can claim to have good character unless they have compassion for the needy. Abigail Van Buren said, the best index to a person's character is how he or she treats people who can't do him any good, and how he treats people who can't fight back. Too often, we stop short with integrity without moving forward to becoming compassionate people. Well, I'm a man of my word, or I'm a woman of my word, people like to say. And that's great. We should be a person of our word. But that's integrity. But how compassionate are you? How much do you care about other people? Integrity is one thing. Having compassion about other people is another. So if it is true that we grow and evolve in terms of our character and our sense of ethics and morality, then compassion is the apex of that process. It's the top of the character mountain. It's the ultimate goal. And the question is, are we there yet? Have we reached the summit of virtue? The perfect trifecta. There's no good way to address all of the complexities of what it means to have a good character. You can't do it in one sermon. You can't do it really in a series of sermons. But people have tried. And I found something I think really kind of sums it up a little bit. This was on March the 20th, 1925, in London's Westminster Abbey. And this was delivered in a sermon by Frederick Lewis Donaldson. He preached a sermon about the 7 social sins. And basically it's a sermon about how character plays out in the larger society. What does that mean? What does it look like in the larger, out in the world, for individuals to have character? How does it play out? And I think these are worth hearing as long as we remember that they are also worth doing. Here's what Reverend Donaldson said are the 7 social sins. Wealth without work. Pleasure without conscience. Knowledge without character. Commerce without morality. Science without humanity. Worship without sacrifice. Politics without principle. It's a good list. In the coming weeks, I'm going to try to glean more out of what I consider to be the greatest hits of the letter of James. Much of what he says, I think, is extraordinarily relevant for us today, as it always has been. For starters, as we talked about today, he does a really good job of showing us the character traits of the ideal next-door neighbor. Someone who has open ears, has integrity, and practices compassion. And remember, you and I are likely to be somebody's next-door neighbor. Let us pray.